Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Hail and hello, my constant listeners, my semi-constant listeners, and a brand new welcome hello to my 2020 listeners. That sounds so odd to say, doesn't it? I wanted to bring something to each of us today in our sharing of time. This podcast is going to be released just shortly after New Year's, and what I wanted to do in honor and celebration of the secular New Year is to pull cards. Now, that isn't something that I have ever done on my podcast, and it certainly isn't something that I advertise that I do. I do like to use oracle decks and tarot decks. My preference is tarot for readings. I'm certainly no expert. I know some of my constant listeners, you guys could, and probably the semi-constant and maybe even new listeners could kick my butt reading tarot or oracle decks. I prefer reading stones, bones, nuts, and teeth, and I believe I have talked about them before in various ways during the podcast. It is a form of divination for me. I am going to do a short video on rock divination, and I will be introducing you, if I haven't already, to the 7-stone divination. But I'll get more into that on the video, but that will be coming out very shortly. So let's just focus my attention, not your attention, but my attention, darling, on what we are going to do today. When I first started to learn what are some of the hallmark, what do you call them? I guess the hallmark demarcations. I don't know what to call it. So anyway, some of the 5 primary signs that you are practicing shamanism, or what binds shamanism globally. I don't know really who decided on the 5. I know that Mircea Eliade was one of them, and I'm assuming that Levi Strauss could have been a part of that too. So we're looking at this from a fairly white perspective, male. So one of the, not that that makes the information any more invalid, but it certainly does color the lens. Divination is one of the 5 signs of a culture that practices shamanism, or what was determined as shamanism. I really enjoy divination. As I said earlier, I don't advertise that I do divination, and for my own very special reasons. I think one of the reasons, and this is going to be a personal little tangent, but I think one of the reasons is that I don't really wish to be perceived as being a psychic or an intuitive. I think that there are many amazing psychics, intuitive card readers in the world, and my modus operandi is my healing work, my teaching work, and my in-depth relationship with spirit and with shamanism. I think that is the reason that I'm not very keen to share a lot about my divination skills. I really enjoy reading the oracle cards for ones that I'm choosing to read. And these are Christine Northrup's cards, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. I've never really looked at the book, maybe in the first, I'm not going to lie. I never used the book. I'm sure I tossed it in the garbage the minute that I opened up the box. And I know that this was a gift to me, and it was made a gift to me many years ago, this particular deck. But boy, have I ever found them to be very useful. The deck in and of itself is conspired or created by classical paintings. And then there are various categories. There's 4 categories wherein the paintings go, and then there's a series of numbers. Now, as you do know, I have a love for numerology, and I have studied it in depth and find it to be a very useful tool when doing divination, or even working with someone on the medicine wheel, knowing the date of birth, the time of birth, and what is the numerology of that. So I also incorporate that into my tarot readings, is what are the numbers that are showing up. And sometimes I also like to focus on what are the numbers that are missing, because those may be aspects of ourselves that we should shine a light on, or an aspect of ourselves that we could become, or that we're blind to, or maybe we just simply don't have. Maybe those are just, aspects that we don't have. What I've done is I've laid out 6 cards. I haven't turned any of the cards over yet. And this is a reading for 2020. And what I wanted to do was to provide Spirit an opportunity to share some messages for the next 6 intervals in the year. So January, February, March, April, you know how it goes. So there will be 6 cards. And I think that maybe this message is for one of you. Maybe this message is for a number of you. Maybe this message is for all of us. I really don't know. I have never been inspired or requested from Spirit to engage in oracle or tarot reading with you. I know I've talked about it in Divination and Chakras, and I know I have an article on my site for Divination and Prophecy and Chakras, I think. So anyway, let us flip the very first card. It is called Fertility and Creativity. That is the heading. I remember I said there are 4 categories of the cards. And the number that is associated with this card is the number 4. And it says beside it, hierarchy versus partnership. I know that you can't see it, so you're just going to have to envision this with me. The card is a pharaoh or a learned man sitting on a chair and is risen above his people. There are many blues in the color. There is a woman who is begging, looks like she's about to beg the man that she's bringing her request to. She is wearing a blue cloak as well. She has a head covering. Her hands are up in a pleading gesture. He has his right arm extended, left arm extended with the pointer finger pointing. So it looks like an accusatory card. And this is for January and February. It falls under fertility and creativity, hierarchy versus partnership. How I'm going to read this card is I'm going to see this as being the masculine power. I don't mean male. I mean masculine as in the active power, as in the motion power. The masculine power, it seems to be in the news globally. I'm not just speaking about North America where I live, but this speaks to me regarding the change or perhaps the light that we're putting on to inequality between the poor and the wealthy, or the masculine and the feminine. And here I'm specifically also going to take it a third in the male and the female, the discrepancies between the male and the female. In the background are witnesses, and they're all male. I don't see a female in the background. I'm going to take a lot of information from the color blue when I speak of hierarchy versus partnership. Blue is a color of communication, and it was often used in very spiritual pictures. The color blue was left for the Mother Mary in the Christian paintings, and it was made from lapis lazuli, And that paint was so expensive and so rare that it was saved only for the most sacred of all paintings. So when I see blue, I think of where the reverence for the color may have ascended from. So I find it interesting that the sacredness of blue in the Caucasian, the Northern European centric reality that we live in, it refers to how it rose from being referenced to the mother of Jesus, or the goddess, or Brigitte, or whatever goddess you know that Mary comes after. And how that turned into a boy's color, how that turned into to be a male color. However, this is a card also, this picture is regarding how the subjugation is occurring and how we are being witnessed with a tender voice. There is one woman, meaning there's a singular voice, meaning that there are many voices, silent conspirators or silent voices in the room, but that there is quite an inequality with regard to respect and power and decision making. And I think that is a very global message, and how it plays out in fertility and creativity, hierarchy and partnership. I see this as being a period or a card that is speaking about the fertility is being brought into self. This isn't a fertile time of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. It is the time of the year where there is no fertility. There is that coldness of the earth, the hibernation of the animals. So I think that what we're talking about, because I'm going off on a tangent here, what I think that the first card that we're talking about first talks about the disparage of power. So the power over. The second card that we have is self-expression. And again, we have a number 4 and hierarchy and partnership. That's very interesting to me. When I read these cards and I see hierarchy versus partnership, I think about it as a jockeying for position. The male over the female, the one voice over the other voice, the voice of the angry over the voice of blah, 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 blah. You know where I'm going with this. And here again, we have the picture of 2 women are in the foreground. One looks as though she's regal. She's wearing a crown. She is reading a book, so she obviously has a lot of wealth and has very liberal-minded males in her world to let her read. It looks like a Renaissance painting. And there is another woman leaning in towards her ear to whisper. And 2 faces are facing completely forward, not paying attention. And there is what looks to be either the cutoff of an angel or it could be an angel statue. So I'm going to take this when we come from the fertility and creativity and we come now into self-expression. So I see this as a place of making plans. So this is March and April. We're making plans. We're learning to express ourselves, to come from a place of being first on our knees, because the woman in the first picture is almost on her knees, to now having women of one of a highborn and one that obviously has her ears. So again, we're still seeing a hierarchy. I'm still seeing not an equality, but an inequality. I find the representation or the sight of an angel's wing in the background to be whether that message is being inspired from above or being inspired from a spirit of self. So I think we have an interesting beginning of the year in inequality and then learning to express the self. So there's going to be more communication, more things are going to come about. It'd be interesting to see what happens in March and April to find out whether there's change in government or whether there is a change within your own family, your own self. Perhaps you have a better voice, or perhaps you have a female in your family who will have a better voice. The third card is Enlightened Heart and Mind, and it is the number 9. It's the first completion card we have, and we're also into the January, February, and then March, April, and then May and June. So we're coming into the solstice. We're coming into the half time of the year. Or for the southern hemisphere, you guys are coming into winter solstice. We're coming into summer solstice. This is a very interesting card, and it often comes up when there is the need for a person to remember that even in their solitude, even in their time of being lost, they are still well supported. There are spirits that are gathered around what looks like could be a religious figure laying on the ground, but could just be a beaten down man with good robes. Who knows? I like the idea of regroup and enlightened heart and mind. It comes from that place. Now we have self-expression. So we had the communication, we had inspiration. So we've now, in this other part of the year, we've received that inspiration. We're looking for inspiration in our communication, in the ability perhaps to make changes. And now we've moved into enlightened heart and mind, and we're regrouping. So there's something more that's coming to us. So the first half of the year appears to be a time of perhaps not a lot of joy. There's not a lot of joy yet in the cards. So there are a lot of shifts and changes that are still occurring. And I'm thinking of the things that are going on for each and every single one of us in our personal lives. And some of us have very great and are on that side of the medicine wheel. And I know I have listeners who are on the opposite side of the medicine wheel, where there are things that are incredibly dire, and there are relationships and financial situations that are very dire. So I understand that there is a huge spectrum of ears that are listening to the words that are coming from the cards. The enlightened heart and mind gives me hope. Let's see what the next part is. Partnership and prepare. It's a number 2. So we're looking at that duality. So where we have the 4 and the 4, so we have that solidness, we have solidness of self, we have the 4 corner blocks, we have the 4 foundational stones. So these are the foundational cards. When we came to the 9, it's that place of now we have to, in numerology, 9 is the end of a cycle. 9 is the end of that 9 years that you've been through. So now what is it? We've skipped over year 1, which is that time of either implosion or explosion. And we're in number 2, which is prepare, under the guise of partnership. This is a very beautiful card. All of the cards prior to this, the fertility, self-expression, enlightened heart and mind, all have black backgrounds. This card has very pastel background, watercolor background. There is joy in the card. There is repose. There are spirits that are encouraging, smiling. So it looks as though we are now coming to a brighter part of the year. It's also the time of the harvest. The number 2 is that number for duality. The number 2 in this time of July and August, this time where we're either in partnership with land, or we're coming into the darker parts if you're in the southern hemisphere. So this time of partnership, we come from enlightened heart and mind. We've been inspired. We may be down on the ground, that we may not be able to reach up. But in the next half of the year, it looks as though things are looking up. We have reprieve, whether we have reprieve weather-wise, whether we have reprieve emotionally within the house or in the family or in the work. Hopefully we have some reprieve from a geopolitical perspective, from a global manner. There are a lot of things that are going on at the beginning in January. There's a lot of civil unrest in many countries. So this we're going to see and look forward to see what happens for the next part of it. We have another enlightened heart and mind, complete and move on. So we've regrouped, we've repaired, and now we're at the number 10, which is also a number 1 in numerology. Complete and move on. And we have enlightened heart and mind, and we're back again to the feminine. And we are sitting, she's sitting on a very regal chair with there's a contrast in the arch of the house or arch of the top of the painting, which is at a hard right angle. And then we have a very round angle. We have an arch under which her chair sits. So it appears to me that although messages are coming, they're having a hard time getting through the blocks in the way. So keep your mind open, keep your spirit open, keep yourself open, keep some optimism open. And there are 3 books at her feet, 4 books at her feet. One is open, one is green, one is black, one is red, which I find interesting because those are also the colors of the maiden mother crone. So I see the wisdom. We're coming into the fall part of the year. We're past that fall part. We're moving now into, we're moving into that equinox time. So we're coming into the latter part. So now we see the pulling away of the sun. So we're coming from light into darkness. So the very first cards, of course, we have the backgrounds because we're still in that dark place in the northern hemisphere. When we come into the southern hemisphere, when we come into that time on the medicine wheel where things are light, we have lighter backgrounds, but we've regrouped, we're preparing, but what are we completing and moving on? So this would be a good time to take stock of your life and ask yourself, where am I? And this is the fall part of the year, so this is the time when we take stock of what the harvest has been. It is a time for that where we've had illumination in the east, and now we're having that time of introspection, that time of reading, that time of moving on. So the world may take its own view internally and look internally. The last card that we have for the last part of the year is Enlightened Heart and Mind. So we have 3 enlightens. We now have 110. This is finally a 7. So we have 4, 4, 9, 2, 10, and 7. 7 is the path of introspection. 7 is a number of loneliness. 7 is a number of spiritual path. It's like the moving inward, moving silent. It's a time in your life. It's a time of the year. It's that number that allows us that pathway into self, that pathway into introspection, mysticism, mystery, and it really is a card of mystery. I like that the last 2 cards, the last 4 cards have been Enlightened Heart and Mind Partnership, and then the last 2 Enlightened Heart and Mind. I think that the self-expression, so whatever is going to come in March and April, whatever that expression out, hopefully awakens us, perhaps on an individual level, perhaps on a global level. That coming into partnership, but it's a brief partnership because we've got enlightened and now we've come partnership. So what is that brief partnership about? Is that brief partnership about trade negotiations? Is that brief partnership about reconciliation within your family? Is that partnership about reconciliation within your shadow and your light self, within your spiritual self and your mundane self? So all of these things could come into play for you. The Enlightened Heart and Mind for the latter part of the year, so for December and November and for October and for September, we are looking at times of, again, they're feminine cards again. And they're females that are, the woman who's sitting in the chair is very self-possessed. There are no other humans around her, so she is that well of communication within the self, that intuitive wisdom, the intuitive self. She's risen from the masculine aspect of self that we saw in the regroup with the image of the well-robed man laying on the ground, to now in the latter part of the year, the latter part of the darkness, the snake moon, the elk moon, the time of transformation, change, moving within. We now have active versus passive. How active do you want to be in the last part of the year, and how passive can you be in the latter part of the year? When we have enlightened heart and mind, oftentimes we are being asked to take an active role in sharing our information and knowledge, but we also take a passive role in that receiving of the knowledge. Not that what happens when you receive knowledge is necessarily a passive experience, because it's not necessarily a passive experience. Sometimes when we are in places of enlightenment and awakening, our bodies can go through some very interesting, if not somewhat very painful times. And that can be headaches, that can be body aches, that can be nausea, that can be fatigue, that can be any number of things. It can also be ecstasy, it can be high-wired, it can be enthusiastic, joyful. So there are many ways of expressing that enlightened heart and mind. There are many ways of expressing self. When we're completing and we're moving on, it's the harvest time of the year. It's the closing of the grain bins. It's the breaking out of the mead that was made earlier in the year. It's that time to reflect and what have we brought in. The last image in the number 7, the active versus passive, enlightened heart and mind, is a woman who is in service to spirit. And the voice of spirit, the face of spirit, is floating above her and definitely giving her images and wisdom and messages. So in the beginning of the year, our messages very quickly, they seem to be coming from human to human perspective. In the next card, we have human to human communication, but we have the angel's wing. Then we progress to a being who is flattened or maybe in repose or maybe must think about things, but the spirits have gathered. So the spirits now have become even more of a relevancy. In the next card, that partnership, in that comfortable repose, the pastel colors, the joy and the helpfulness of spirits just above is a great way to move into the next phase, the harvest phase, the putting away phase of the year. The complete and move on. Now we've come again. So we've had spiritual. Now the last 2 cards are, we've been awakened, we've been spoken to, we have been through hardship, we've now come away from hardship. Now we have a different place. We're somewhere else on the medicine wheel. We have gathered more knowledge. We have gathered more teachings. We sit in the chair and reflect upon who we are. And in the latter part of the year, we reflect on where we could be and we listen to the divine messages. So the divine message has been haltingly moving through. And when we come into the bottom of the year on the south part of the medicine wheel, we have a relationship that is necessitated between the human and the spiritual. It's very important. And then the next part of the journey of the year is that introspection, the bringing together of the knowledge and the wisdom, the channeled messages, the heartfelt messages. And then the last part of the year is your ability, or perhaps the world's ability to have its back against the wall in a good repose, not a back against the wall because it has nowhere else to go, you have nowhere else to go, but your back is against the wall being supported, and you have the voice of the spirits speaking and enlivening you and giving you messages to rotate and begin the world again. So looks like it will be an interesting year, and I know that it seems very ambiguous. I understand that. However, it's really not that ambiguous. It's ambiguous in the regard of, does it apply to the globe or does it apply specifically to the individual? I really don't know. I don't know who specifically these messages are for. As I'm reading the cards that have been chosen, it certainly does appear as though these readings could be taken on a global level as well as on a personal level. We can't underestimate the intensity of the globe that we are living in. We can't underestimate the intensity of how we are how we're deeply influenced by various political measures that are going on right now. Australia is burning at a horrible, horrible pace, and the smoke has turned the skies red from what I understand. And my goodness, my thoughts are with Australia. My thoughts are with the Southern Hemisphere and the Ring of Fire. My thoughts are with the world as we transition from being dictated to, it feels like in the beginning of the year, it feels like the stronger voice, but the voice that is being talked down to is the unheard voice or the ignorable voice. The ignorable voice. So why did I get back on this tangent when I was talking about whether or not this message could be globally or this message could be individually? I think that we live in a time where we are able to see and work with the metaphor of the macro and the micro, when we can work with the truth of the macro and the micro. There are many ways of accessing information and knowledge. Divination is one of them. I enjoy divination. I enjoy the use of skills and objects and magical items to help me as I as I move through this world. And I think it's really important to never underestimate the world's desire to communicate with you. Never underestimate that. It was not on my mind when I set about to record this podcast to do a reading. And I don't even remember the steps which took me to this place. My head was buried in very intense and very deep essays that I had written on two spirits and another one that I'd written on totemism. And I was not thinking about divination. I was not thinking about how to provide an information. And then I just felt the desire, as many of you do. You know how intuition works. You know how I've joked about being a marionette simply for spirit. So I ask you never to underestimate the world or spirit's desire to communicate with you. There are so many forms of communication. The journey is just one form. Divination is another form. Scrying is another one. Gazing is another one. There are many ways that we can turn our attention to the world's inside and outside. And the cards are really speaking about more of an internal journey than an external journey. And the cards really bespeak the imbalance in the beginning of the year to the reflection and of self at the end of the year. So I don't know if the cards are bringing you through your own disasters or you're moving through disasters, or maybe 2019 was a disaster. Maybe it was stellar. I don't know. I really don't know, my listeners. I don't. But I think I have moved into enough tangents today, and I look forward to doing a video on throwing stones. It'll be kind of fun, and I look forward to sharing some tips and tricks and some of my insights. And whether you believe me or not, one of the ways I end a story is, whether you believe it or not, never allow the truth to get in the way of a good story. So whether you're skeptical of tarot or oracle cards or not, never ever let the truth get in the way of a good story. So hopefully this has been, at the very least, a good story. Until next time, see you later.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.